Okay, folks, so again, like I said, chapter 21 is not on your midterm, but it will be on your final, okay? It will be on your final. So to kind of get us, into the context of what's going on here with chapter 21, whoa, I don't know why it did that. There we go. This is the moment where President Roosevelt, this is where we last ended chapter 20, right? With President Roosevelt now coming into office. So President Roosevelt gets elected with his New Deal, right? This is the New Deal. So now let's look a little bit at the New Deal and what this is, what this means. And the fun thing here is that you have the opportunity to ask me questions, right? You can stop me because normally if you're listening to the recording, um, you can ask me any questions. I mean, you can always ask me a question at any point, whenever you want. But so far, nobody has asked me anything about the lecture content. But here, if you have a question, I mean, ask me, okay? So, and then I want to make it engaging because again, I don't like just talking at you. This is one of the, again, few times that I actually have to lecture, like a real chapter lecture. The other one was a fun lecture, because it was real interactive. It was like the people of the depression. It wasn't like an official lecture. This one is an official one, but I still want to try to stop and ask you questions too. Okay. So at this moment, okay, like I said, I think somewhere, it had been in chapter 20, we are redefining liberalism. Now we see that liberalism, this word, okay, is going to take its modern definition in the 1930s. It is here during the Great Depression, here during the implementation of the New Deal, that again, liberalism gets its modern definition. And you read about this in chapter 21, right? So what was liberalism before, right? What was liberalism before? Somebody tell me what classical liberalism is. Think of liberalism in terms of what it was thought about. What was the role of government? Okay, what was the role of government in the economy in the late 19th century, like in the Gilded Age? That's classical liberalism, right? So what did people think about the government and the economy here in the Gilded Age, in that late 19th century period? What did people think? What was the approach? What do you think, yo?
Wasn't it that the government should not be involved with the economy, or is it the opposite?
No, no, that's exactly right. I wish I had that little picture, but yeah, laissez-faire approach. You're very, very, yeah, that was exactly it. And I think somebody popped something in here too. Did what they want with as little government interference as possible? Yeah, y'all are both right. Yeah. So that's exactly right. That's that Lochner era, right? This is that Lochner era. You do you business, you do you economy. Government's not gonna interfere. It's that laissez-faire approach. Okay. So classical liberalism in the late 19th century is very much that laissez-faire approach. Okay. And then we enter into the 20th century, right? And you kind of have a little redefinition of liberalism still. This is the progressive era. Remember that early 20th century. So here it is something called regulatory liberalism, okay? Here we know that progressives sought to maintain capitalism. They're not trying to dismantle the system. Progressives wanted to maintain capitalism, but they observed that after a whole century of unrestrained capitalism, they saw these problems arise. Remember all the problems in the late 19th century and all the problems that these progressives wanted to fix, right? So they see that they need, or they believe that they needed legislation to keep these problems in check. All right. So this is regulatory liberalism. Again, maintain capitalism, but provide some type of legislation, government, to keep it in check. Okay. So again, we're slowly redefining liberalism. Again, all this is going to become the political ideology that's going to undergird these New Deal ideas, the New Deal politics. Okay. And then lastly, now here in this 1930s period, okay, again, you've seen the evolution. Now we have social welfare liberalism. Okay. So here, social welfare liberalism. again, they're kind of maintaining some of that regulatorialism ideas in terms of maintaining capitalism, right? But this time, they are sure that the national government needs to step in to solve the social and welfare issues of its citizens, including issues like education, unemployment, healthcare. So now we have a new idea of liberalism, and this is essentially what, if you're talking about, what liberals believe today, these are kind of what their focuses are, right? So again, that 1930s period is where you have modern notions of liberalism, okay? Is this moment right here, this social welfare liberalism, again, where people believed the national government needs to step in to solve the social and welfare issues of its citizens, including education, unemployment, and healthcare. Make sure you know the difference between these three, y'all, okay? Make sure you know the difference between those. So with these ideas in mind, we have FDR and his New Deal, right? So what were the goals? What were the goals of this New Deal program that Roosevelt is putting out? So first and foremost, his goal is to save capitalism. Okay, again, he's still this mindset. He's not trying to dismantle the system. He's trying to save capitalism. But he did believe there needed to be a balance, though, between liberty and authority. Okay, or liberty with authority, whereby there were certain regulations that would prevent risky practices. Okay, they noticed, they saw how this unregulated market led to the stock market crash, for example. Okay, so he says and believes there should be a balance of liberty with authority. Okay, and liberty and authority. But here they are very much believing and of the mindset that freedom is going to be very much connected to security. Their main goal here is going to be security, okay? We'll get into kind of all the different components of what does security mean. But it's at this time, y'all, that they're not trying to redistribute wealth right now. Okay, the redistribution of wealth is not a main goal right now. It's mainly these three things right now. Again, so we're looking at providing security. What does this mean? Well, like at the onset, they're just trying to make sure that people have economic security in what is always going to be an unequal society. Again, they're not trying to redistribute wealth right now. They know capitalism leads to inequality and will always lead to an unequal society at this moment. They're just trying to provide you some type of economic security, all right? In what areas? Well, they figured they needed to secure investments. They needed to secure bank accounts. They needed to secure jobs, mortgages, all these different things that people were losing or trying to fight to keep, right? So when thinking about the New Deal, okay, all of these goals of the New Deal, there's a way that I was kind of taught to think about it, and that's I'm putting forth here. I was taught to think about the New Deal in kind of these three different categories. The New Deal is going to provide reform, recovery, and relief. Okay, reform, recovery, and relief. Now, Foner separates it by the first half and the second half, right? Like, remember in the book he talks about first 100 days, and then there's a moment where he then shifts in talking about the second New Deal. That's fine. That's totally fine. You can think about it these both ways. It's just that, if you're thinking about another way, instead of just like, putting it in halves, you can think about these three main kind of goals of what the New Deal is trying to do: reform, recovery, and relief. Okay. So here again, they're trying to reform, as much as they can, so we don't go through this again. They're trying to recover, right, as soon as possible, have some type of recovery as soon as possible, and then finally, they need to provide immediate relief, right? All these three kind of goals go into the major goals of the New Deal. All right. So let's go over all these. So first we have reform. Okay. First we have reform. So what are we trying to reform? Well, we know that, here we go. I always forget to go through these things. Okay, so first we have reform. Well, the banks are, just a complete disarray right now, right? So he's like decides, okay, you know what, y'all, we need to just completely declare a bank holiday, all right? If banks are closed, you won't have people running on the banks. right? I know you read this in your chapter where, I mean, there's stuff going down. You may not know exactly what's going down, but you know, I better go get my money out of this bank right now, right? So and so went to go get his, so and so went to go get theirs, and you know what? I think we need to go get ours right now too. Right, this fear, all this massive fear is going to drive people to go and essentially take out all of their money from the banks. Do banks, if you have, $500 in your account and, everybody else has around the same amount or something, does the bank always carry the amount of money that says in all these people's accounts? No, it doesn't. So eventually, that money's going to run out of the bank. It forced lots of banks to close and left lots of other people with just a piece of paper in their hand. But look, it says I have $500. Sorry, there's nothing left in here. All right. So Roosevelt declares a bank holiday, close the bank so people can stop making these run on the banks. Okay, so he did this in March of 1933. Now, banks that were financially solvent, they could open back up, and then banks that were completely, just gonna be, go off the edge. Roosevelt tried issuing types of funding to keep these banks afloat. But again, banks that were financially solvent, they were able to open back up. Now, also in 1933, you also have the Glass-Steagall Act. Okay, he implements the Glass-Steagall Act. This is very important. Okay. This Glass-Steagall Act, it stated that, or it called for, the separation of commercial and investment banking. Okay, the separation of commercial and investment banking. Why is that even important? Well, because the banks had all your money, right? The banks had all your money, and it's like, oh my gosh, I got the greatest idea. I'm gonna go and put this in the stock market, and I'm just gonna triple all of our monies, right? I'm just gonna make us all, we're going to profit from this. Don't worry. I'm just going to put this in here in this investment. and what happened when the stock market crashed? Millions of dollars are gone, right? In a couple of hours. We heard that, right? So the Glass-Steagall Act says banks, you can't do that anymore. It called, again, for the separation of commercial, right, yours, and investment banking, whereby commercial banks could not invest in stocks. Kept the money separate. Y'all, this was heavily dismantled in the 1990s. Okay, the Glass-Steagall Act was pretty strong for a while up until the 1990s. Okay. Now, what it also, in addition to these banking acts here, we also have the creation of the FDIC. Now, I know you see this on the little bank, when you go and deposit money, right? This is protected by the FDIC. So here, this is going to essentially insure every deposit up to like $100,000, right? Why are they trying to insure your deposits? Well, because they're trying to rebuild confidence back into the banking system. I know nobody trusts the banks. That bank just closed down, lost everybody's money. Now they're losing their houses, they're losing their homes, their farms. They don't trust the banks. So this is the FDIC, or implementation of the FDIC, is to help provide that security, right? This is to help you rebuild confidence back into the banking system. Back here in 1933, they were insured up to about $2,500, right? And then in 1935, we see that the FDIC is made permanent. And it also, in 1935, this Banking Act, it also significantly extended the supervisory of the Federal Reserve, okay? The Federal Reserve, y'all, was created back in 1913, right? What is the Federal Reserve? Well, the Federal Reserve consisted of 12 regional banks. Okay, these 12 regional banks that you have, they're overseen by a central board that is appointed by the president. Okay, the central board members are presidential appointees. These people, a lot of power, y'all. They are empowered with handling the issuance of currency. Okay, so they're the ones who see how much money is put into circulation. They also provide aid to banks that are in danger of failing, and they also influence the interest rates, okay, because they're trying essentially to promote economic growth, whether or not they do it the right way. They're the money folk, right? But they are the ones who are influence interest rates. So if you are hearing on the radio, oh, the Federal Reserve has sought to maintain the interest rates, or they're not increasing this year or something. That's what they're saying. That's the role of the Federal Reserve, okay, controlling essentially the money flow here in the country. So we see that again, the supervisory role of the Federal Reserve is their powers are extended here in 1935, okay. And then here in 1934, we also have the implementation of the SEC, right, the Security and Exchange Commission. So they're going to impose modest kind of do's and don'ts on the stock market, exchange. You know, they're going to forbid certain practices. Again, it's all about reforming, making sure we don't go through this again, even though some of these have been repealed since this moment, right? But in 1935, we also, you know, again, trying to reform in the spirit of reform, we also have a huge win for labor, okay? In 1935, you have the National Labor Relations Act. This, y'all, is very important because it will finally guarantee, okay, it will give people the right to join a union. And it will say that unions have the right to organize and collectively bargain. That's big because you know the history here with unions and the government and with business and how the government was on the side of business and stopping and quelling these unions and their power. Now we have a huge shift in the 1930s. This is a huge gain for labor where they have the right to do this and collectively bargain. That's big, okay? We also there's a break here that's happening between the American Federation of Labor and so the American Federation of Labor, they're the union that was mainly for like craft, like people in skilled crafts. This was a union for those people, right? But what about all the other industrial workers, right? They were how are they getting organized? Because you've seen from previous chapters, the IWW lost a lot of people, remember, because of its quote unquote radical politics. So here we also see the creation of the CIO, the Congress of Industrial Organization, right? So here this is going to be mainly for industrial laborers. So this is let me show you a little like their symbol because I thought I had a slide on their symbol. Let's see, the CIO, labor. Oopsie. There we go. So there it is. Okay, so here's the CIO. Now it's merged in the 50s, but at this moment we see the rise. Okay, we see the rise of the CIO, again, the Congress of Industrial Organizations here, where these people, again, they weren't the skilled, you know, craftsmen of the AFL, okay, the American Federation of Labor. These people also wanted to participate in organizing, but because the AFL wasn't speaking to their needs, they went and branched off and founded their own. Okay, so here this is going to again be for industrial, mostly unskilled workers. Okay, so here we see the creation of another big, powerful labor union, and these two will merge here in the 1950s. All right, go back. There we go. So also part of the National Labor Relations Act, it was also meant to add security to the economy for these workers, okay? And it's very much trying to create a pathway between employer and worker, okay? Trying to create a pathway between the two. So I have a couple of other, you know, big moments here, but essentially this was a big win for labor at this moment, okay? But is everybody super supportive of all these new gains for labor? Of course not, right? Of course not. You have a lot of people who were very opposed to these new gains for the new gains that labor was getting, right? Who would be opposed? Obviously, big businessmen. Okay, obviously, big businessmen are going to be very much opposed to all these gains that labor has. And here's a fun, you know, political cartoon where they have like the New Deal labor policy. You know, it's a mask for all this, you know, crazy ideas. Look at this. Utopian dreamers, collectivism. Oh, they're communist, right? Oh, they want the redistribution of wealth. It says something. Government, I can't hear see that one, but labor barons, a self-perpetuating political baron. So here, obviously, not everybody is up for all these huge gains made by labor. Okay. Now, in addition, we have oh wait, you know what? I did forget something over here. At this moment, I also wanted to make sure that I remember money. I forgot to mention this before. That it's at this time that Roosevelt will actually take us off the gold standard. Okay, here it's part of these new what is it called? Like new expansion, okay? Part of this new expansion of the Federal Reserve, okay? So in this kind of like this new Federal Reserve system, this expansion of the Federal Reserve system created in 1913, we see that it is within this time that they will, and will, you know, with Roosevelt, all abandon the gold standard. Why? Because they believe that by abandoning the gold standard, this is going to be another way of increasing the amount of money and supply here in the country that is very needed, okay? We'll see when we get back on the gold standard here in World War II, or kind of like towards the end of World War II. But I just wanted you to know at this moment, they take us off, okay? We are taken, the United States is essentially taken off the gold standard. Again, they're trying to increase the money supply, right? I forgot to mention that one. Okay. Now, if all of that is meant to reform, right? All of that is meant to reform these practices, so hopefully we don't run into these problems again, okay? Now, what about recovery? Okay, now we need to promote some type of recovery here within the nation. This is where we get the NRA, okay? So the NRA, it is part of the larger, okay, NIRA, all right? So the NIRA is kind of like the umbrella, and then the NRA is part of it. So here, in order to recover, we need to stabilize the economy and industries, okay? Again, you have the creation of the National Industrial Recovery Act, okay? The National Industrial Recovery Act. This act would establish the NRA, the National Recovery Administration. So if you see, kind of, some people kind of see this kind of interchangeably, but the act established the administration, okay? And what will these people do? Again, remember, the whole point here is we're trying to create a pathway between business and the workers, employer and employee, right? Just like we were doing with the NLRA. Here, that bridge is still being pursued, okay? So it's at this moment under the NRA, okay? It's at this moment under the NRA that we see business leaders, okay? Business leaders coming together. And they are supposed to be establishing industry codes. Okay, these business leaders under the NRA are coming together to establish industry codes. And these codes are going to be like, they're going to be setting standards. So standards for output, for prices, for working conditions. We see them trying to come together. Now, even though they're creating kind of this bridge between here at this moment, is kind of like a bridge between government and the economy, right? But we see that unfortunately, the people who are making these decisions are from like big business still. So what's left out is that small businesses, or these small businesses are essentially left out. In the end, the NRA, this goal is not successful. Okay. Again, because small businesses are having to combine, people are losing their own little bitty shops. And why are they trying to combine? Well, it's because big business is exerting way too much influence on all of these standards, right? They're exerting way too much influence on generating these codes, and not everyone is agreeing, right? Everyone has their own kind of say, but it's ultimately going to be up to big business. And then we see that as they're trying to set wages, I mean, they're not setting high enough, right? We see here in chapter 21, people are arguing for at least a kind of like a standard of living wage, right? So where you're able to participate in the economy right? As opposed to, just surviving. So here we see people are not getting paid enough, like the wages that they're trying to promote. It's so in the end, again, it is not successful, and it is even ruled unconstitutional. But again, even though it's ruled unconstitutional, this is this moment where we're trying to create these bridges, okay? Trying to create bridges, again, like the the NLRA, like between employer and employee, or between, with the unions, and then here between the government and the economy. We're trying to create bridges, but this one is also deemed unconstitutional. Another one that is unfortunately deemed unconstitutional to the dismay of Roosevelt is the AAA, okay? AAA. So this one, here you have the Agricultural Adjustment Act, and this one is supposed to help farmers from overproducing, okay? Again, this is a big thing. If you have overproduction of things, then that is going to equal to falling prices, right? So here, they are trying to help with that overproduction. They are trying to reduce that production, okay? So if you're trying to reduce production, they essentially were going to pay you. They're going to pay you to not produce. Like, say you got 5 acres of land. Okay, we'll pay you to not produce on 3 acres of that land. Okay, cool, says the farmer, right? What happens to all those workers that were living on his farm? Maybe he had some sharecroppers on the farm. They're going to get laid off. Or they're going to get, essentially fired, right? Or moved or displaced. Because now the farm owner is getting paid to not produce on that part of the land. But what if that was your part of the land that you were living on as a sharecropper? So we see how the AAA was very beneficial to farm owners, not to the workers, not to the tenants, right? Not to the people who are living on those farms themselves. Now, ultimately, again, the Supreme Court will also find this unconstitutional. But they did leave those farm subsidies, again, where farmers are not paid to, or where farmers are paid to not farm a certain amount of land, and we see leaving a lot of people out, the actual workers, right? The people who work this land are not going to get anything for when that farmer kind of kicks them off, all right? So here, that's them trying to provide recovery. The last one is relief, okay? The last is relief. So here, there's a couple of different relief things or relief program that Roosevelt tries to implement here in the larger New Deal. The first, or one of them, okay, is going to be the FERA, okay, the Federal Emergency Relief Act. This, y'all, is going to provide states with direct cash for the people. We know we have reformed several of these legislative pieces that, we're trying to prevent this from happening in the future. We know we're trying to provide recovery to large segments of the population, but lots of people are still unemployed. They need direct relief. So now we have direct cash payment to the people coming through relief, all right? By 1935, people are still financially oppressed. Okay, so again, while we have this economic reform and recovery, we know that essentially, especially what Foner talks about in the second New Deal, this is very much going to emphasize economic security through relief. Okay, they're trying to protect people against or from unemployment and from poverty, right? So again, here's relief efforts. So in 1933, we have the FERA. These are early on, kind of relief efforts, but these are very, very limited and very, very exclusive, okay? What happens is that even though states were allocated specific grants, okay, to help with unemployment, to help people with actual, direct cash relief, who are governing these boards? What if you're in the South? Okay, what if you're in the South and you're in the heart of Georgia or something, okay? And you are set to go and try to help your community. Now, you are a part of this board, but you are also a product of your time with all of the racial bias and stereotypes, again, of the early 20th century. So, you have people's essentially lives in your hand, but how do you deem, again, it brings into those it brings into conversation those old ideas about the worthy and the unworthy poor. Okay, so it could be that a black family didn't receive the same aid as another white family, depending on where you were. Okay, and this is, I'm telling you guys, this is very, very exclusive at this time, because again, 1930s America, they're still a product of that moment, and those ideas of, we talked about eugenics, right? Of those ideas about racial inferiority and superiority. What if you're in the Southwest? What if you're in Texas? These relief boards, they also had in law or in place residential requirements. Okay, so you had to be in this county for at least 5 years to receive aid. Okay, for some people, yeah, that sounds great, right? What if you were part of the migrant labor force? You don't stay in a place for 6 months, let alone 5 years, right? So then those migrant laborers who are very, very in need of this aid are not going to essentially qualify because of these residential requirements that they impose on what they know is a migratory labor force. So they did help a lot of people, but they also excluded a lot of people. Okay, of the CCC. So there's and I'm talking as I'm speaking, there's a lot of acronyms, right? There's a lot of acronyms. At the very end, I have a couple. Okay, I have a couple of these. Oh, Agriculture Adjustment Administration. I said ACT. Oops. AAA, Agriculture Adjustment Administration. But I have a couple of these here, but obviously they're in your book too. But this is like the alphabet soup here, of the New Deal era is kind of like this alphabet soup. But this one is a CCC. This is a Civilian Conservation Corps. This is also created here in 1933. Now the CCC, these folks are really set out to and really kind of focus on the natural environment. So here they're going to be setting up and improving national parks. I mean, a lot of these things, and Foner gets into detail off a lot of these, what their purpose, a lot of these different organizations, what they're doing. So they're either building bridges, they're either building airports, they're either building national parks, they're building building stadiums. I mean, like what have you, right? It all depends on which one you're working for. This one, again, you can see is very outdoorsy, and it's going to be really set on improving national parks, the CCC. Now, while this did, up to 3 million people with jobs, it was also exclusive. If you wanted to be part of the CCC, you had to be a man, okay? So the CCC, it most definitely put 3 million men back to work, but no woman could be included. So that's also kind of had gender exclusivity there. But it did help put 3 million men back to work. Another one was the WPA. Okay, this one is one of my favorite ones here. This one, we'll talk a little bit more the significance of this one on Wednesday in terms of putting specific people back to work. But the Works Progress Administration, this is going to put about 3.5 million workers back on payrolls. Okay, they're going to hire artists, journalists. Remember Dorothea Lange, right? She's going to be hired as part of this larger WPA project. Photographers, all of these things. And then here, as part of WPA, you have the Federal Writers Project. They are going to go out and interview formerly enslaved people, okay, and get paid for it. So all these are like projects with the WPA. It's pretty cool. And then lastly, another big program, obviously, that's going to provide relief is Social Security. Okay, this is the big one here, 1935. And who gets Social Security? It's people who, again, thinking of those like late 19th century ideas, worthy and the unworthy poor. Here again, it's like people who needed help, no fault of their own. So people like the elderly, disabled, right? Families with dependent children type stuff. So all of these are going to help people who through no fault of their own. So this is going to be financed though through a mandatory payroll. Okay, through a mandatory payroll, you get Social Security taken out. But not everybody gets Social Security taken. Not everybody gets it taken out. It would exclude agricultural workers. It would exclude domestic servants. All right. So what happens is that because of its exclusivity here, it essentially leads to the development of a stigma. Okay, and then I don't know if you've heard kind of these conversations, but they're looking at like, oh, well, I put into my Social Security. There's something of you putting into your own, okay, where you are contributing because it's deducted from your payroll, but there's other people who don't automatically get that deduction because they were excluded at this moment. So whenever those other people kind of seek public assistance, there's a stigma to them because people assume that they're not contributing in a way. So they just see folks as taking as opposed to contributing, even though they do contribute just in different ways, right? Everybody has to pay, different types of taxes. But because it's not contributing to the Social Security, there's a stigma on people, okay? And you can read that. Foner gets into that a little bit more in depth in your chapter. So that's the last one, right? Now, of all these different ideas, there's lots of people who have perspectives. Today people have perspectives on the role of government and how much or how little involvement it should have, right? You had critiques. You had critiques from the left, like Charles Coughlin and Huey Long, who was assassinated, right? So these people are saying he's not doing enough, right? And you can read more about these men again in your chapter. But these folks have really in-depth radical ideas, okay, on how to fight, for example, social justice. Charles Coughlin implements this into his policy to fight for social justice. Huey Long too. Huey Long. They had these. Both of these men have ideas of making, for example, those wealthy Americans kind of not kind of, but they make like they tax them more so they could pay for other programs that would kind of benefit the whole. So critics from the left are saying, Roosevelt, you're doing enough. You're not doing enough. And obviously critics from the right saying this is an overreach. This is an overreach. Here we go. Look, the New Deal tyranny. This is a far overreach. It's going to come in like the horse. What is this from? Oh man, Troy, right? This is the Troy little horse where you comes in and this is going to be the end of the Constitution as we know it. So here we have critics from both sides. In addition, there's another critics or criticism happening kind of from both sides in terms of Roosevelt's policy once he begins to promote the idea of packing the court in 1936. Okay, so we know that in 1936 he's reelected, right? He's reelected, but by 1937, as all of these that he had been working for have been deemed unconstitutional, he threatens essentially the Supreme Court with packing the court. Why? He says, you know what? I think he was proposing to remove justices who were over the age 70 because they were just, clear with all those old ideas of the Gilded Age and ideas of, social Darwinism. And so he threatened to pack the court. Now, this one, everybody was like, whoa, Roosevelt, So here you see this political cartoon really exemplifying like the hands of dictatorship. This is the chief executive. This is Roosevelt holding the legislator, the justices in his hand, right? So here, legislative branch of the government, and he's going for the justices, grasping for the judiciary, right? So, these are kind of the moments that people are thinking about here. Everybody has a perspective on Roosevelt and the New Deal. Is he doing enough? Is he not doing enough? Like, what is he doing? Is he overreaching? So all these ideas again are in place here at this moment as well. So here again, these are dismayed Roosevelt voters. I didn't remember that. He's voting here and then he's reading his court packing plan. And he's like, oh man, that's an overreach, right? So those are, I'll have to get into these. Okay, so those are kind of it. We have just a few more minutes and I really want to finish this off. So, kind of looking at an overview of what the New Deal did accomplish, okay? We see that it accomplished quite a bit, right? We know that it did indeed provide relief and employment for millions of people, even though it was very exclusive, right? We know that it also created a welfare state based on a goal of providing basic security. Now, welfare state here, if we're looking at the British, World War II sense, this is not, it doesn't have a negative connotation. It will be later that a stigma is applied to that term. And again, you can read about that more in Foner. We know that the New Deal did indeed reform capitalism to ensure its survival. Capitalism is still in place, so we know it didn't dismantle it. We see that it did indeed expanded the involvement in government in the national economy. It significantly diminished poverty among the elderly because of the Social Security Act. And we know that it helped the U.S. avoid extremes of fascism and totalitarianism and communism. So when people go to dire economic straits, that can have an effect on the change of essentially the government, right? We avoided that, okay? We avoided that. We see it happening in other, for example, Latin American countries, right? So with this New Deal, the scholars propose that it helped avoid those. But what it did not accomplish, we know it did not end the Great Depression. We know it did not end economic equality because that is still much felt today, right? Economic inequality, sorry. We know that it did not redistribute wealth. We know that it did not end poverty. We still have all of these things that, wouldn't be too bad. Could we end poverty, please? Could we promote some type of economic equality a little bit better? It's also not addressing gender or racial inequality. We see this in the relief boards, right? It's not going to end capitalism. And it did not initiate socialism. So we don't see this kind of redistribution, even though we did see more hands-on, right? Hands-on approach of the government in terms of trying to regulate the economy to prevent, big catastrophes like the stock market crash. And it did not destroy big business or private enterprise, right? We know that these are still, thriving today. So we see that there were accomplishments, but we still have, a lot of issues that are being brought back to light again here with our pandemic, right? So, we finished. Yay, we finished. We didn't get to do the little fun project where we look at New Deal stuff here in San Antonio, but at least we got to finish this. So on Wednesday, we're going to come back and we're going to look at, we're going to do our oral history presentation, okay? Let me stop recording.